Nice to meet you. No, I think. Hey, how are you? Thank you. It's good to see you. Thank you too. Oh, we'll find out.
Little jazzed up song.
Yeah.
I feel like a theme song is always good for to start the morning.
Rock and roll, baby.
I feel like it's a good way to start off the day.
Want to say hi to my wife, Chris?
I would love to. Hi, so nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. How are you? Thank you. Hi, how are you?
I met you last week with Jenna.
That's right. I was going to say,
This is Judge Erskine.
Judge, so nice to meet you. How are you? Great, nice to meet you. Thanks. Welcome to the job. Thank you. No, but it's so fun. People and have such a fun time.
You've been very kind.
There's that.
How was that vote? It's my wife, Chris. This is a
Oh, my.
I was here last week with my friend Jennifer, with my twice, and you'll never see me.
Pleasure. Nice to meet you. So nice to meet you. Thank you. Nice of you to come.
I wish we'd get more people to come.
Hi.
Rachel Martin. Thank you for your training. And you're from Brooklyn? I do human rights for women and violence. I was here one day when there was a judge being asked. Yeah. And you were sort of questions. Who was here?
Good afternoon.
When we were starting our hearing a little bit later today,
Come on.
accommodate people. How are you?
Thank you. I'm well, Counselor, I'm well.
Good. Okay, I'm going to start the hearing by reading your nomination into the record. A letter that this council received on May 1st, 2019. Dear councilors, I am pleased to nominate Stephen J. Bolivar to the position of Associate Justice of the Juvenile Court, Worcester County Division. I submit this nomination for the advice and consent of the Executive Council pursuant to Part 2, Chapter 2 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Sincerely, Charles D. Baker. And before we start, I'd just like to give the nominee an opportunity to introduce anybody that is brought with them today. We have a few people here. Sometimes the room is full and sometimes it's not.
It's okay. To my left is my wonderful wife, Christine, of about 28 years. This is Attorney Nicholas Plant. You'll be speaking on my behalf. This is Judge Carol Erskine, presiding judge of the Worcester Juvenile Court.
Morning. And I will introduce with my colleagues who were present. There are a number of counselors walking around the governor's office right now, but they will be joining us momentarily. Counselor Joseph Ferreira.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Counselor Mary Burley. Good afternoon. Counselor Marilyn Fields.
Nice seeing you again.
Nice to see you again.
I am going to start by asking anybody who's going to testify to please stand with your hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
First witness is the Honorable Judge Keller. Good morning, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ladies. Good morning. program.
I just said that as well. so. Good afternoon.
We have been joined by Council Robert Juvenile, Council Christopher Iannella, and Council Terrence Kennedy.
Good afternoon.
All right, good afternoon. For those of you that I haven't met this morning, I'm Carol Erskine, First Justice of the Worcester County Juvenile Court. Again, good afternoon, counselors, and thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of Attorney Stephen Bolivar's nomination to the Juvenile Court bench. I know that I don't have to tell you what a special place the Juvenile Court is, given that our important mission is to serve the children and families of our respective counties. I have known Steve Bolivar for over 20 years, not just as a lawyer practicing in our court, but first as a social worker in the days when I was a lawyer practicing in part in the Worcester County Juvenile Court. We actually had clients in common, and I remember so well being struck by his calm, compassionate, empathetic style with troubled teens that were on both of our caseloads. He had a way of communicating with kids that really brought out the best in the toughest or most emotionally fragile teens. These wonderful traits translated well to representing juveniles when he became an attorney. Watching him lean over on many days and whisper a few calming and encouraging words to kids coming in off the run into our court, or those traumatized by sexual exploitation, or sobbing teens coming in from the overnight lockup after being arrested during a family dispute. It has been truly inspirational to watch him with these kids. His ability to connect in a compassionate and respectful way with them has been unprecedented in my court, and these attributes, essential in our court, are those that will make him a highly successful juvenile court judge. Every kid in our court has a story, and listening to them with respect and understanding is a critically important aspect to being a juvenile court judge. Attorney Bolivar understands that because he has lived it as both a social worker and a lawyer. But make no mistake about it, Attorney Bolivar is a highly skilled, talented trial attorney with a strong legal acumen. His understanding of the rules of evidence, criminal and civil procedure, as well as the juvenile court rules and standing orders, is exceptional. He has appeared in front of me on hundreds of bail hearings. He's appeared in front of me on dangerousness hearings and firearms cases, as well as evidentiary motions to suppress or to dismiss for lack of probable cause. He has expertly tried rape and armed robbery cases, to name a few, as well as the very legally complicated and intricate termination of parental rights trials where he has represented both children and parents. He is meticulously prepared for trials and has a courtroom presence and demeanor that displays an easy temperament coupled with excellent and zealous representation. Attorney Bolivar has actively sought and supported diversion programs for juvenile defendants, a very important aspect of our court management of delinquency and youthful offender cases. He has done an incredible job of managing a busy practice while maintaining a healthy work-life balance. He's a wonderful husband and father who has a great sense of humor, a quality so necessary when the days in our court are filled with troubled or abused and neglected children. The Worcester Juvenile Court continues to be one of the busiest juvenile courts in the Commonwealth. 5 years ago, our statistics showed that we were hearing approximately 425 new child abuse cases, child abuse and neglect petitions, or care and protection petitions as they're called, filed by DCF each year. A year after the last time we saw 425 cases, our petitions on child abuse and neglect cases increased to 695, and we have remained in the 600s since that time. There are currently today 1,331 care and protection cases open in our court. How many is it? 1,331, with 2,487 kids in foster care or kinship placements currently under our jurisdiction in Worcester County. In total, There are over 3,200 children on all case types combined, including child abuse and neglect cases, delinquencies, YOs, children requiring assistance. Stephen Bolivar has practiced zealously and exceptionally in every one of those case types, and I cannot think of anyone more qualified, more compassionate, or more skilled to fill the role of a juvenile court judge than Attorney Bolivar. He is highly respected by all members of both the bar and the judiciary, as well as our clerks, court, and probation staff. He has a great respect for the diversity of our Worcester community and is in every sense the right choice for the children and families we serve. I thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and and I respectfully urge you to vote in favor of this nomination.
I believe Council Pereira has his hand up first.
Judge, thank you very much for coming in. I appreciate that. It means a whole lot when the person who's going to be the boss comes in and says he would be wonderful working in court. I understand, I think it was NPR just did an expose on Worcester County.
Correct.
There's an incredibly disproportionate amount of foster kids that are out there. Why and what do you need to make it better, besides Steve?
Right. Well, besides Steve, which will be a huge thing for us, the WBUR, and there have been a number of articles. I mean, when the statute creating the statewide juvenile court system passed, they assigned 4 judges to Worcester County, but yet I think 6 or 7 to Boston and more to Springfield. I don't know why. And I think when Senator Moore heard those numbers, he's the one that then asked for, not only, he's here, I think, filling the wonderful shoes of Justice Leary, but there's another opening for a circuit judge to fill some time. Up until about 2 months ago, we had 241 cases waiting to go to trial, and only 4 of us to handle those cases along with every other case that we hear in our court, including emergency petitions. One of the reasons Worcester is so busy is that 5 years ago, it was in Worcester County where the filing of a petition in our court revealed that a child was missing from the family that was being monitored by DCF. I'm not revealing anything that wasn't public information because, as you know, Jeremiah Oliver was eventually found and had been found deceased and sadly in a suitcase on the side of the road. That happened in Worcester and set about changes in DCF policy that increased the number of filings in our court. And that, coupled with the opioid crisis, has caused our numbers to soar and has caused a backlog, which we are working on now, restructuring our trial system, which will help with the addition of a new judge and hopefully 2 judges. But we have been able to, just in restructuring, decrease the number of backlog trials from 241 to 150, and we're moving ahead to bring forward the other backlogged trials, which in part will be assigned to the new judge assigned to our court. But those are the reasons for the types of cases we're seeing. It's all, the number of cases that we see, the numbers are mostly the child abuse and neglect petitions. We have so many children in foster care, even though we try to put them in kinship placements. And sadly, the department doesn't have the number of foster homes that are needed in Worcester County and around the state, and many kids are in what the department calls hotline beds, meaning that a child is removed from a parent's custody because of serious allegations, and there's no foster placement, so they literally live in the DCF office, meaning that someone babysits for them during the day if they're not school age, and then at 5 o'clock, special foster homes open up that are called, they're just emergency foster homes, and they will take the child for a night, and then the child will go back into the DCF office the next day. So it really is a crisis right now in Massachusetts, and I'm heartened by the fact that the governor has recognized that it's an issue and that there's a lot of focus on the foster care.
Does the trial court reallocate resources depending on how many filings there are per county?
Well, sometimes they do. I think all the courts are busy. In our court, the Chief Justice provided us with a recall judge to help with emergency petitions, and we've had her 2 days a week for, about 2 years, which has been very helpful because when the cases come in, we have to do a hearing within 3 days to determine whether there's a preponderance of the evidence to keep the children out of the home. And recently, they assigned retired Judge Collins to our court 3 days a week to also assist with the backlog of trials. So we have.
I was talking to a judge the other day, she told me these kid detention cases go on for 2 weeks, and your decision is 70, 80, 90 pages.
The trials are intricate. I just finished one, and several months ago, and the findings were 110 pages.
Yeah,
But that's the kind of thing that I have to do at night, because these emergency petitions are important. I can say in the last 3 years with the opioid crisis, it's the first time in my 17 years on the bench that I've actually had cases coming in where both parents have passed away, leaving these children in our custody and us trying to find a permanent setting for them. It's the opioid crisis is taking the lives of people and leaving children in the system, or the attempt to work with these folks, which I think the department works very hard with them, is all about getting these kids back home and reunifying them. We do have a fairly high rate of reunification after working with folks. And I think one of the things that's helped us out is we have, in our delinquency numbers are decreased. We have many diversion programs, so we don't have to hear a lot of delinquency cases because we're able to divert them into the programs that we have and keep them out of the system. So,
Thank you. I thank you for your service, and I thank you for being here today. And lastly, do you have any reflection on the reform law that doesn't allow police to charge people 12 years old or younger? How is that affecting the court system?
well,
What are your thoughts on that?
as you would imagine, the numbers of delinquency cases have gone down. I mean, I was never a huge fan of 10 and 11-year-olds being charged with crimes. What I would have liked to have seen when they changed the age to 12 is that there would have been something in the legislation in order to deal with issues of kids who are 10 and 11 who are having serious problems, say, with aggression and those kinds of things. What I would have liked to have seen accompanying that law is an increase in mental health services for all children, particularly children under the age of 12 who need it. To me, that would have been the answer to the question. What has happened with kids who really act out in ways that might otherwise be charged criminally is that the schools now file habitual school offender cases, and they come into the CRA system. And so I think what the unintended consequences is that these kids are now at risk of being taken out of custody of their parents, because they need, intensive behavioral treatment. And in order to do that, they have to come into the care of the Department of Children and Families in order to pay for it. In my view, people should not have to give up custody of their children to get them the help they need, even if it's a behavioral residential program. But that's what's happening in Massachusetts. Hospitals discharge kids in 3 days saying this child is fine, and then on the discharge plan it will say go to the juvenile court, your child needs long-term residential, even if the child's 9, 10, or 11. And what happens as a result is the parents come in thinking that we're going to help them with a residential placement and have no idea that they have to give up a constitutional right, which is custody, to their child to get the child the help they need. It's probably one of the most frustrating aspects of my job, that mental health services are not provided.
I hope you come to the state house and talk to the legislators about that.
Yeah, I speak frequently to my own legislator, who is Senator Moore, about these. I never wanted to see 9, 10, and 11-year-olds charged with crimes, and we divert over 40% of our cases. Every case that is a driving case, like, a theft of a motor vehicle. We started a one-day program called Team Ride with UMass Medical Center in 2006. We diverted well over 1,500 cases, and our recidivism rate dropped from 33% to 5% just having that program. We have the only domestic violence diversion program in the Commonwealth right now. Kids who hit their parents were arrested for domestic violence, arraigned, and came into the system. We have the only domestic violence diversion program in the Commonwealth where those kids and parents are put into a 3-month program of intensive services, respite if needed, and then the case is dismissed prior to arraignment. So those are some of the good things that are happening.
No, very enlightening. Last question, do you see any cases or increase in cases where older drug dealers use 12-year-olds to sell their drugs and then they can't be charged?
Well, what we see are older drug dealers and gang members using younger children. the word hasn't gotten out about the kids being under 12, but the older gang members actually think that juveniles can't be arrested. So what I have seen are cases where older gang members who are older than 18 have given kids firearms who are 14 and 15. I've had kids tell me, you can't, I'm a juvenile, and don't realize that, that they are now charged with firearms cases and subject to a dangerousness hearing. So I've definitely seen manipulation from older gang members, but they're misinformed and don't understand that, that they think based on the new law that no juvenile can be arrested, and so we're seeing them, use juveniles, to hold drugs and guns. Unfortunately, it's affecting those kids who come before us on delinquency or even youthful offender cases.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
I'm all set.
How nice to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No, it was my proud vote, and I just listening to you, your heart's still in it, and it's wonderful.
Thank you.
One of my proudest votes.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a privilege to serve in the juvenile court. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, and when you think of when you first got appointed and now how our society has even changed, and, we find children in bags and the river and every other thing. So I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you very much. Very much
Very proud of
appreciated.
that vote.
Thank you. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Next witness is Attorney Nicholas Plant from Worcester. Good afternoon, Attorney Plant, since we have you here.
Good afternoon. Thank you,
Kind of
Madam.
nice when we have cases against each other. I'm never holding you on these. So
And I suppose it's the only time you'll get me to stop talking.
yeah.
Right. Madam Chair, distinguished members of the council, allow me to thank you for the opportunity to address the council today on behalf of the nomination of Attorney Stephen Bolivar to the Worcester Juvenile Court. I offer my particular thanks to my friend, Councilor Casey, who's a colleague of mine at the bar in Worcester and is a well-respected and easily approachable voice for our local bar and the council. So thank you again, Councilor. I've known Steve Bolivar first as a member of the bar and one of my very first opponents in a domestic relations case early on in my career, and I came to know him later on as a colleague and coworker, and finally now as a very dear friend. As an opponent, Steve was an honest and fair advocate for his client, who was very respectful of me, who was at that time a very junior lawyer, and also of my client. I so admired Steve's ability in the case we had that when it was over, I asked him to allow me to just come and watch him conduct some trials so I could learn from what I considered to be his very effective trial skills, which Steve readily agreed. While watching Steve during those trials, I learned just how much skill as a lawyer he had. His substantive knowledge of the law, his knowledge of the rules of evidence, and a very, very effective courtroom presentation style. Steve is an excellent trial lawyer, and I believe wholeheartedly that it will translate into being an excellent trial judge. Some years later, I joined the firm that I'm now a member of, and it also happened to house Steve's firm. We became co-workers, essentially, sharing physical office space. While Steve managed a busy solo practice focusing on juvenile court work, I was exclusively a domestic relations attorney. Our shared quarters gave me an incredible opportunity to watch Steve and really get to know him and his work. In my view, and I think in your view shortly, you'll see that Steve's knowledge of the law is very self-evident. Any discussion about the juvenile court reveals the breadth and the depth of Steve's knowledge on the civil and on the criminal side. In addition to his knowledge of law and procedure, he's worked on committees designed to improve the juvenile court's case flow, and he's supervised new CPCS lawyers, all signs that he cares very much about the institution that is the juvenile court. As many of you know, most of Steve's work involved court-appointed cases in the juvenile court. Unlike me, Steve didn't have the choice who he represented. He represented all kinds of people from all walks of life. And Steve did it brilliantly, in my opinion. He represented parents who were in the most difficult circumstances of their lives, fighting to save their children or coming to terms with the reality that they needed to let their children go. Steve represented people accused of crimes against their children, and Steve represented children who had been victimized by the people that those children should get to love and trust the most. Steve's cases were rarely easy. They were often heartbreaking. It was an exceedingly difficult practice, and it was not uncommon for Steve to be appointed by the justices of the juvenile court to some of the most complex and challenging cases in that court. Steve's clients were a diverse group. They came from all races, sexual orientations, socioeconomic statuses, and religions. They spoke all different languages, and they were in and out of our office regularly. But they all shared a common thread. They needed Steve's help, and what impressed me more than anything else about Steve was how respectfully he gave that help to them. Steve never judged those clients. He didn't treat them harshly or disrespectfully, no matter what they were accused of. He treated them with dignity and fairness, and he gave them exactly what they were entitled to and what they so desperately needed: a competent trial attorney, zealously safeguarding their rights and assisting them to make life-altering decisions. I know Steve will treat those that come before him as a judge in the very same way he treated those many clients who came into our office, respectfully and fairly. He'll make sure the rules are followed, the litigants' rights protected, and he will render thoughtful decisions at the conclusion of a fair process. As our lives have continued on, I've come to know Steve as a very good friend, a devoted husband, a wonderful father, and a doting grandfather. He's an exceptional friend and colleague, and he's been just that to me. Some years ago, when my wife was very suddenly and seriously diagnosed with cancer as a very young woman, he stepped up and covered my cases, helped my work production, just to help and make my family's road a little easier. He cheered us on, along with his wife. And I know that he will bring that same collegial attitude and helpfulness to the court and his colleagues on the bench and in the courtroom as well. Steve, his wife Christine, his family have become incredibly dear to us, and I know they will provide Steve with excellent support to help him manage the difficult times that will surely come his way as a judge. They will support him in the same way that Steve supported me and my family during challenging times. And I have to tell you, my wife, who is an intensive special education teacher in the city of Worcester in a very urban school, said to me as I was backing out of the driveway this morning, "Just make sure you convey how much the children of the Commonwealth need Steve." So I told her I would. Steve is a man of great faith, certainly a strong faith in God, faith in our government institutions, faith in the juvenile court. He knows what the juvenile court is capable of. But what I think is truly spectacular about this nomination is that we can have great faith in Steve and the work that he will do as an Associate Justice of the Juvenile Court, because those of us that know him well know what he is capable of. A skilled trial lawyer, a very good and decent man, and an outstanding judge if this council confirms him. I feel like I get to speak on behalf of the Worcester County Bar Association a little bit. We're a very collegial group, and I will tell you that we were all ecstatic when we received word of this nomination. We've heard near uniform praise from our Bar Association, from the judges that's currently sit, from all of us. We're very, very excited about this nomination, and I would respectfully urge the council to confirm Steve. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from actually, unless anybody is in opposition to this nominee, Council Kennedy, you said there was a bus that was part of the
Wait,
same
one line of
bus.
security too.
You lead all those
We
people
might want
in
to
and out?
try to come in.
Okay.
They did have to come all the way from Worcester.
I think I know who's driving too. I think I know who's driving.
Yeah, I do too.
Having hearing, no other witnesses come forward, I'm going to close that portion of the hearing, and I'm going to yield the floor to the nominee, Attorney Bolivar.
Thank you.
Tell us why we should make you a judge in the juvenile court.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. A few moments just to thank Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito for their nomination. I was quite humbled. I'd like to thank the staff of the JNC. Throughout this process, they've been nothing more than kind to me. I'd like to thank my guests and your councils for reviewing my files and taking the time to review my application, and most important, my wife of 28 years. I wouldn't be here without her. That's going to be the emotional part of my testimony, and I'm trying to get through it. I was born in Worcester. I was raised in Worcester with my three brothers. I attended Worcester Public Schools. My parents still live in Worcester. They're in their 80s, still living in the house I grew up in. 4 boys in a 3-bedroom house with 1 bathroom. Every time I go back, the house seems a little smaller than it did the time before. But my parents are doing well, and they certainly would be here today if they could. My parents taught us great morals. They taught us right from wrong. We didn't have a lot of money. My dad worked his tail off after the service, and they provided the very best for us. My mom would stay home with us until we were in junior high school. Then she went and became an RN to help financially. We never went on fancy vacations, but we always came first. When it was time for me to go to college, my brother wanted to go. My older brother, he deferred. There wasn't enough money to go around. He joined the Coast Guard and went to college when he was in his 40s. And I got the opportunity to go. In 1986, I became part of the Department of then Social Services. Was an ongoing social worker. I dealt mostly with adolescent and some protective issues. My task was to assess people, assess families, keep families intact, find services that best met that need, and I would appear in court on a fairly regular basis. I earned a master's degree of education during that time. But as I appeared more and more in court, I began to develop a passion for the law, and with my wife's blessing, I went to law school at night while working full-time at the department. And in 1993, I knew what I wanted, and I knew what I wanted to do, and I immediately began doing care protection cases out of the Worcester Juvenile Court. My delinquencies, in 1996, when the youthful offender law became part of the law, I did the youthful offender cases as well. More recently, I've been supervising through a contract with the Committee for Public Counsel Services about 15 of the lawyers on the delinquency panel. I review files, I observe them, we meet, I evaluate and give them good advice if I can. And if I don't know the answer, I find out the answer. I don't know anyone in this business who knows everything, and every day I'm challenged with learning something new, and that's part of it. But what brought me and kept me at the juvenile court was the diversity and the passion that I have for the clientele, both the children and the parents. What's remarkable is that each and every day that I appear at that court, I'm doing something completely different than the day before. And I can be representing an armed robber one day, and I can be representing a 5-year-old child in a care protection and foster home the next day. And the changes and the different types of cases have just kept me energized and motivated to continue to do what I want. It's as I look back, it's been 25 years. Although 33 in child welfare, 25 as an attorney, and I tell you now, in a blink of an eye. And when you look back in our lives and our mortality, I look back and it's like, where have the 25 years gone? And I've loved every moment. My wife would tell you I jump out of bed every day eager to get to work. There's not for one day I regret anything that I've done in that court. I'm asking for your confirmation. I believe that I possess qualities that would help the bench. I am fair. I'm kind. I listen to people. I treat every individual the very same. No one's better than anyone else. 13 years ago, I applied for this very same spot. My friend, Judge Keating, was confirmed. And although disappointed, I understand the process, and I think we all have a path. And it wasn't my time. And 13 years, and hundreds of cases later, I feel that I've certainly matured as a lawyer. I look at cases a little differently now. I would hate to guess how many cases I have touched over these years. I'm going to say it easily eclipsed about 2,000. I do work in the probate court as well, and I do enjoy that work, but certainly my passion is in the Worcester Juvenile Court. I thank you for your time, and I ask for your confirmation.
Thank you. You don't always have nominees who actually ask for our vote, so that is a good question to ask. Kind of like when you run for office and you don't ask people in the audience to vote for you after you've just given this whole talk. So that was a good question to us, and I call my good colleague, the former mayor of Springfield, attorney, former justice of the district court, Mary Northern.
Trying to most titles of anybody. Yes, that's true. In any event, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would indicate that we had a great talk on the phone of some length. And I was very impressed, and I would like you to repeat in the presence of Judge Erskine exactly what you said as far as how you would handle the backlog. Because I think having been a judge, I understand, we have call a list on trial day, of perhaps 10 or 15 cases, knowing full well that once their feet are put to the fire, there's a deal to be made in most cases, and it usually breaks down to just 1 or 2 trials left. But I think perhaps if you were to
Sure.
do that again, I think it was very illuminating for me.
So as we know, there are hundreds and hundreds of cases backlogged, and the shortage of help as far as judges, clerks, courtrooms, has affected the flow and how these cases come about. And right now, Judge Keeney is doing a superb job as right now the only judge in the trial session. And it's mostly triage. Just trying to, there may be 20, 30 pre-trials on a day, and it is not uncommon that on a Monday there may be 10 cases scheduled for trial. And what's bothersome is that when you look at the date of filing on those cases, you see that these cases are now 2 to 4 years old, and some even older than that. As a defense lawyer for many, many years, I think I know the answer to the test. I know as a defense lawyer that if my case is on for trial, and I know there's 9 other cases, and I know my parent client is not going to win this case, and that they have not complied and have not acted, I'm going to roll the dice with him and plan on that my case will not get reached for trial because there's 10 others, and there may be another 1 or 2 older than me. What that does is it gives the client an extra 3 to 5 to 6 months to rehabilitate their issues, and then you have your trial date come up. I think one of the issues that I would bring to the court's attention and hopefully try to help this situation is I know that if I stand in front of that court and I have a case in front of me, and I say to those lawyers, I'm going to go get my notepad, and when I come out, you've all had this in your trial book for a year, so I'm not going to hear about continuances and all this. I want opening statements. And once the defense lawyer hears that, because I'm talking from my own perspective, once I know that I'm being called to task, I'm going to then have, Judge, I need 2 minutes. And I'm going to have that heart-to-heart with my client. We're up. It's now or never. And if I'm doing my job for my client, I'm going to be able to say to him, the department has the burden of proof. The department has to prove by clear and convincing evidence that you are unfit. And they have their workers and they have their collateral witnesses on call. Can we win? Because now's our day. And it's at that moment that not all cases will resolve. Some people would rather go down and fire and burn out and say, you know what? I did the best that I could, and now that cranky judge terminated my rights. But most individuals, if they're listening to their lawyers, are going to say, can I win the case? And the lawyer, if he knows the case, is going to say, based on the evidence and what you've not done or done for 4 years since the inception of this case, the writing is on the wall. And it's at that moment that these cases can resolve, if there's a resolution. If there's going to be a resolution, that's the time. There are other cases that, because of the passage of time, individuals go missing. If I'm wearing my zealous advocacy hat as a parent's lawyer, well, it's not my obligation to tell the judge that I haven't seen my client in 3 months. But those cases where people have disappeared and they've left their kids stuck in foster care, it's not fair to the child, and those cases should be immediately called to trial. If a parent's not had unsupervised visits and their cases remain active for 3 or 4 years, and they have not gotten to a point where they are addressing their issues and dealing with domestic violence, their opioid issues, and it's been 3 or 4 years, and that kid, as judges pointed out, is going from bed to bed to bed to bed, I will not allow that to happen. I am not going to allow a child to be bouncing and bouncing and bouncing. The child is victim. He's a victim of this process, and she or he deserves stability in the family setting. And in a family setting, as we know, can be an aunt, an uncle, so many grandparents step up. So many times we place these, I've had so many kids placed in foster homes, and over the passage of time, the bond attaches. And that foster parent who used to be someone who just would do it short term, develops a love for that child. And they say, you know what? We know these are legal risk placements, but we want to adopt this child now. And it happened to me this past year. Foster parents were taking one child, then the sibling came, and right from the very beginning said, this is short term. We're not in it for the long haul. We know there's a need. We know that the department doesn't have beds, so we're going to take these kids. And about a year and a half later, I was with them at the adoption. And it was just spectacular. They couldn't be happier. The kids couldn't be happier. The parents signed an open adoption agreement, so they're able to maintain some involvement with their kids.
I think that you have a great attitude and great ideas. The only thing I would maybe say to improve it is line them up. You're first, you're the backup case, you're the next backup case, you're the next backup case. So once they know that, they're all going to be out in the hall saying, let's make a deal. Because that's what I used to do in my court. And a lot of things go over.
That's a great suggestion, Councilor Hurley. You know, just to follow up with that, I would suggest that at 9 o'clock in the morning the trial starts. And defer the pretrials till 2 o'clock. Because I know that from 9 to 1 o'clock, I can get through about 60% of this trial. Most of these trials are the parents, if they're around, the department, and maybe 1 or 2 collateral witnesses. They're not, for the most part, lining up 15 individuals. So we can knock these things off. The key is getting the designated trial time. Once it starts, they roll. It's getting that trial time started. And that would be a suggestion I would happily discuss with the Honorable Erskine.
The other thing is, I know Judge Collins, he's from Springfield, actually he's from Amherst. Great guy, loves the job, loves being back on recall because it's helping out when there's a serious need. So I will tell you right now, that when I was a practicing attorney, I would never go to juvenile court because I'd be there all day long, waiting and waiting and waiting to get called. So to me, it was very frustrating. So I just said, I'm just not doing it. So for you to be there every day, day in, day out, God bless you.
Thank you.
I was very impressed with our conversations. I think you're going to make a great judge. You've got passion, you've got care, you've got concern, and I'm happy to say I'm going to be voting for you.
Thank you, Councilor. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilor Ferrer.
Thank you. Well, Steve, I really didn't know you, although we graduated a year apart from the school with the third highest pass rate last year, UMass.
Is that right?
That's right. So congratulations. Good choice.
I didn't go to UMass.
You went to Southern Illinois?
Yeah. Oh, it is part of. Listen, when I started, Councilor, it was literally in a bar room when it started in New Bedford before they moved to.
I spent some time with scooters.
And it had the smell of a bar room.
I went there from 88 to 92.
Oh.
I was a law clerk from 92 to 93 when you graduated.
Oh, former chief of police, I didn't introduce him, and attorney, and Councilor Ferrer, sorry.
Not quite as many titles.
I also forgot to mention, if you don't mind.
No, absolutely not. I yield.
Your home counselor was a big fan of yours.
Thank you. She's been great through this process, and I should have said that earlier. She's been great through the process.
Yeah, so actually I don't have any questions. I think you know, again, they glad to hear from you. Counselor on the left who spoke extremely highly of.
Thank you, Councilor, for
providing here, talking on behalf of due diligence. You've done thousands of cases. You're eminently qualified, and I think your heart, soul is in the right place, and you're going to help straighten up.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Ferrer. Councilor Kennedy.
There was one thing that troubled me a little bit that you just said a minute ago, and you talked a little bit about, I actually was paying attention, somebody not dealing with an opiate addiction, that maybe it's fine to basically move on with terminating their criminal rights. Do you think that drug addiction is a medical condition?
I think it's a disease of the mind. I think there's genetic issues, there's environmental issues. I think it's a totality. My comment, if you would allow me to.
Let me follow up with another question. You would agree with me that I've been a criminal defense lawyer for 36 years, as you know.
Yes.
A mutual friend. One of the things I've recognized is that there's a lot of people that are heroin addicts, opiate addicts in general. They can't help themselves. They can't control it. They just can't stop. No matter what we do and how we intervene. Would you agree that that's true?
Yes.
And would you agree that that's true because it's a medical condition, that they can't get under control?
I think it's a combination of a medical condition, environmental, genetic. I think it's a combination. I'm not a scientist, and I'm sure someone smarter than me probably knows more about it, but
But you would agree with me they can't help it. They can't stop a lot of people.
For the most part, I would agree with that.
Okay. Now, and you're going to terminate parental rights because they can't stop, because they can't get off of the drugs and not doing the things that you ask them to do to get off.
I'm not going to allow a child to be sacrificed, if that's what you're asking.
But there's a difference. Because, if you had a parent that had lung cancer and couldn't take care of the child, you may have to put them in foster care because there's one parent, there's no other relatives, whatever, they can't take care of the child for one reason or other. You might have to put them in foster care, but would you terminate their parental rights?
So to answer your question, in terms of a drug user, they are given the tools to try to allow themselves to become sober. And
some people can never become sober. They can't do it. They're not capable of it because it's a medical condition. Any more than a person with cancer can control the cancer.
My belief is that we give these folks the tools.
When we give the cancer patient chemotherapy, we give them the tools. We give them radiation. We give them now all kinds of tools to do it, and they try. And people who are addicted, I feel very strongly about this. I think most of them are accountable to it. People who are addicted. It's a medical condition that they can't control. I am not saying that you should leave them with somebody who's a heroin addict. But there's a big difference between leaving them there and terminating their parental rights.
So the balance, in my eyes, is what's in the best interest of the child, right? If our task and goal is to protect the children of the Commonwealth,
the child to take them away from the cancer patient because she can't take care of them.
My belief with folks addicted to opioids is it's medical, environmental, genetic. It's a composite of all three. And I don't think comparing it to a cancer patient, for argument's sake...
I completely disagree with you on that. I think that clearly you do not want a child living with a heroin addict that's not controlling themselves, that's using heroin, that's active, okay? And we should have good alternatives to that, okay? But to permanently take there may be hope that someday they do get clean, okay? And to permanently take care of their rights, parental rights, I think that if that's the only reason, I think that's wrong. We can disagree on that. Doesn't mean I'm not going to vote for you. I'm already voting for you. I told you that. But I want you to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I completely and totally disagree with that position. I think, and I've seen it. I don't go to juvenile court very often.
Right.
I try to stay out of there because the cases take too long. They last forever. I do take some serious criminal cases in there, but that's about it. But I've seen people lose their kids because they have addiction problems.
Sorry.
And I think addiction is, I believe very strongly, that it's a medical condition.
There are alternatives. If the parents disappeared, that's one thing, right? If they're living in a tent up in the woods, that's a different thing. If they're around and they come forward and say, listen, it's just not going to happen. And I had a case, it's in my cases, where the mom, she was living in a tent out in the woods. department finds out, takes the child, eventually. What we did, we did a guardianship with her parents. It didn't terminate her rights, and if someday,
Well, that's different. That's exactly my point. You don't have to necessarily terminate their rights. There were other alternatives.
there are alternatives.
And I don't think that because somebody I don't think you should leave them with the addict, clearly.
Mhm.
You can't care for them any more than you leave them with somebody who has cancer and can't take care of them. It's about taking care of the child.
I
get
agree,
that.
I agree.
But when you're talking about parental termination of rights, that's the death penalty in these cases. That's the death penalty. And I just don't think that somebody should get the death penalty because they have a medical condition.
If the only, and I agree, if the only thing,
But that's not what you
well, let me clarify. If the only issue is that of opioid addiction and housing, disappearing for 6 months, haven't seen the kid,
Well, that counts with the opioid addiction. But we're still not, but that's where you place them somewhere else. That's not termination of parental rights. There's a big difference.
understood. And in some cases, guardianships are the right path. That doesn't always work out. And if a child's bouncing, and they're developing reactive attachment disorders because they're not bonded and they can't attach because they have 15 caregivers in a month.
I get that, but why do we have to terminate their rights? You can terminate their access to the children on a long-term basis if necessary. You can terminate their certain legal rights that they may have over education, whatever, and put them in the place of someone else, whether it's the Department of Children and Family Services or foster care or guardian or something.
Understood.
But why did that penalty?
I think each case certainly has to be evaluated on the facts and circumstances of that case. I mean, I don't want to make a broad statement that every
Well,
case.
you did. You made a broad statement when you answered the question on Andy's statement about that. You said when they're not dealing with their issues, then you have to move it forward.
For the child's sake, if there are alternative permanency options, then those are always explored.
In your statement, that's not what you said. You follow me?
I do follow you.
I agree with what you're saying now, but that's why I'm asking you the question, because that troubled me.
Well, it's hard to make a statement and say every case that comes before you, that's what's going to happen. They each have to be individually assessed. And as I said, just this last year I did, in a guardianship worked out for the grandparents. And my client said, I cannot maintain my sobriety. You can send me to whatever program you want and have me take whatever you want.
I've seen people become sober 20 years later. You know, when they don't have it under control.
I understand.
Well, yeah, I think you're really highly qualified. That was just the one sticking point I had to get. You know, we talked on the phone for a long time. You come very highly recommended by somebody I have a lot of respect for that we talked about before, as well as a couple of other people. And I think that you're a home run in terms of being on the
Thank you,
board,
Counselor.
and I will be voting for you.
Thank you, Counselor.
I don't think it'll be next week, but the week after. We may not have necessarily next week.
Thank you, Counselor.
That's what somebody just said. George. So, good, I'm all set, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilman Mann.
What'd you call me? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Hi, how nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again.
I want to thank you for all the time that you afforded me. And I got to tell you, we closed the diner. Because we waited till they cleaned up, and then we, but anyway, it was a pleasure. I love your enthusiasm for
Thank you,
what you do.
Counselor.
And you really have had, how many years at this? I mean, besides your present job, going back to when you were in your first position. So how many years all told of that? I had it someplace. 33?
I think this year will be 33 in child welfare.
33, wow. But I have to tell you, I haven't seen someone with so much experience. And maybe it was
maybe it was a good thing that you had a little more time and you weren't appointed, because you probably learned a little bit more, you know? But I'm very concerned about this court, and I told you about the friends I had. And I had friends, they couldn't have children, and they adopted 2 brothers, and they were 10 and 12. And the judge gave visitation rights to the parents, to the biological parents, the father. And anyway, after they were adopted, and it must have been maybe after a year, and they were at the dinner table, and Chad, one of the boys, said that when he was with his biological father, his father would take him in the bathroom and have sex with him.
Mm-hmm.
And the other brother said, Daddy said not to say that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So she went back to the judge who had given the biological father rights to see the children. And it took a year and a half for that judge to stop the visitation. Now, what do you think about something like that?
When the Department of Children and Families has custody of a child, they're certainly empowered and supposed to have regular and consistent visitation. Children within the court all have counsel, and those counsel have a job to do. And those for children who are 10 and 12 years old, it's not a substituted judgment. It's to represent the desires of those children. And if there are issues like that, a motion to suspend visits should be filed immediately, and there should be a hearing immediately to determine whether or not visits are in the child's best interest. I can't speak to why.
No, I thought that too. I was very upset, and I couldn't interfere with the position
Right.
I'm in. But I remember Lisa, the adopted mother, said to me, she said, they would always leave the bathroom door open. And she says, I would be after them all the time. And that was the reason, because that's how they grew up and how they visited with the father.
Mm-hmm.
And what a sad thing. But I have to tell you, I was so impressed with everything you've done, and I was happy to close down the coffee shop.
Same here.
It's such a sensitive court, and you have such a passion for it, and it's so obvious. So let me talk about the process now. So you applied, and this time, okay, so you applied, and you were interviewed by whom?
So my application deadline was, I believe, November 2nd. My interview
November 2nd.
of 2018, I'm sorry.
18.
I believe my interview with the JNC, which occurred in Worcester, was the last Tuesday of November. I believe it was November 27th. From there, I next met with Attorney Ross and then JNC Director Casey on 3/27/19, Sharon Casey.
What was that date?
March 27th, 2019. On April 1st, 2019, I met with the Lieutenant Governor. On April 5th, 2019, I met with Governor Baker.
Okay. So you met with Sharon Casey March
27th.
of this year?
Correct.
Yeah, of this year. Okay. So, and it was the 27th?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That was a week difference which she applied for a judgeship herself. So, tell me, I love your passion. Now, when you are appointed as a judge,
Mm-hmm.
what can you change and what will you change? Because you've been very passionate about things that you don't like.
Well, I first and foremost have to listen to my boss, and she'll tell me what session I'm going to be in. And if it's in the care and protection session, I want to work very closely with the current judge who's in that session to bring as many of these cases to trial. The backlog, as Her Honor pointed out, is significant and substantial. And even though there are 240 or so cases backlogged, most of these cases have multiple siblings, and so that's just not 250 children. Each of these cases may have 2, 3, sometimes 4 children. And the children deserve some permanency, and they deserve to know where they're going to wake up tomorrow, and they deserve to know who's going to be there for them. That would be my hope, but I obviously would defer to the presiding judge, and she will give me instructions on where to go and what to do.
I mean, you absolutely have been dedicated to this type of law. I mean, 33 years, and you started out with the Children and Family?
Department of Social Services then.
Right, yeah. Well, I have my beef with them, I really do. Some of the things that I've seen really upset me, because they go out and they see a child that's 7 years old and they're a weight of a 2-year-old, and then they close the books, the little girl they found in a bag, and
Sad.
yeah, and you don't know why they close the book on that and say, oh, they're okay. That bothers me that there's no follow-up. They should be taken out of those homes. I think, I don't know, from what I follow, it seems like some of the mothers lack self-esteem, and they will just allow the man to beat the child, to offend that child, and that seems to be things I've been reading. Do you see that a pattern?
I see a great many things, and I see a lot of different types of cases, and some fit the description. We have a lot of young people out there having babies. We have a lot of gang activity and people involved with that. There's not enough. There'll never be enough resources out there for all the individuals that need the help that they need.
Right. I mean, you work for the DCF. What would you say? How can that be improved?
Well, I mean, certainly a judge is in a position to legislate from the bench, but certainly having additional resources, additional workers. Some of the workers I see on a regular basis are very much overworked. I don't know, their current contract may be 18 to 22 families, and some of them have 30 or 35 families on their caseload. And there's so many hours in the day. And when you have overwork like that, some things are going to be missed. And that's unfortunate.
Right. So what can you do when you're a judge? What can you do to change that system? Just for what you do rather than the whole court?
I'm not sure that a standing and sitting judge has any authority to make any sort of policy changes and funding changes for the department. I mean, that's with our elected officials, and I'm sure they're well aware of the needs, listening to Her Honor and different people who are into.
Yeah, I hope that they are listening. I think in this society, this is the biggest need, and we read about these children every day being killed, and it just it's heartbreaking.
They are our most vulnerable population, the innocent children.
What would you change if you could in the system, the way it works now, that you're going in the court that you're...
If I had a crystal ball, I would, ask for the Adoption Safe Families Acts and the standing order the governor put out has some very specific time standards within it, and trying to fashion a way to try to hold folks accountable to those time standards. With the amount of cases that we have now, those 240 or 300 backlog cases, every single one of them are well out of time standards, and it's just because there's not enough people to reach them. So reaching these cases is the very first thing that I would try to help and change.
Tell me again, how many cases have you had?
I have boxes and boxes in my cellar, and I would say probably easily over 2,000.
Can you imagine? So you criminal and civil and juvenile court, you've been through them all, haven't you?
Well, I've enjoyed my time at the juvenile court. There's no secret about that, and I enjoy every single day. And I felt in 1993, when I was going to begin my career in doing this stuff, I felt like there were many different aspects of this court, and each of them are much different. And it really keeps you re-energized and revitalized you because you're doing just different things. Even though I may have 75 open care and protections, every single one of them are a little bit different, and I approach that differently.
Well, the couple that I was talking about, he was a firefighter with my husband, and, one of the boys, the mother used to put some kind of liquor in the bottle, and so he has some learning problems. And that's the thing I think that's prevalent, isn't it? That you see a lot with learning problems because of parents doing things like that.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And, the key is recognizing it as early as you can. Worcester, certainly in the counties that surround and the towns that surround it, have some wonderful special ed departments. But recognizing it early, I think, is the best way to beat it.
How can we advocate to have more judges? Because it's obviously that, we heard from the judge that there is such a need. And to me, the most need is our children. I mean, this is devastating that they're left in limbo and they're not adopted or just nothing.
I agree with you. There should be more judges. There should be more clerks. There is a need. There is a need, and I think our legislatures are the ones who get that information to the governor.
Yeah, well, to me, I think, for me, and I usually don't show my hand, but I mean, I met with you all those hours, we closed this place down, and I just was so impressed with your background because you have a heart for this. This is not easy. I can't even believe you can go home and go to sleep and forget some of those kids that you worry about, And I like your answer when you, while generally guided by statute, judges do have considerable discretion in the area of criminal justice sentencing. Depending on their philosophies, judges may exercise discretion to promote criminal rehabilitation, the protection of society, and deterrence of other criminals. And they ask, could you characterize your own views on how this discretion ought to be exercised? And I really liked your answer, especially the second part. You said, although judges are guided by statute, my philosophy on sentencing might be based on age, history with the court, the substance of the charge, and the facts contained within the adjudication.
Adjudication.
Okay. I'm not a lawyer. I believe each case requires a thorough and independent analysis and not the automatic imposition of broad-based philosophy. And this other part really touched me. I believe that juvenile offenders should be given the opportunity to rehabilitate themselves and would strive to balance the needs of the child, the opportunities available to rehabilitate, and the general public safety. I mean, I've never seen that question answered better than that.
Well, it's a very unique population, much different, I think, in many ways.
What's the average age that you're seeing coming through?
For the delinquency, 15, 16, 17 years old.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you think there should be a change in the courts for the age? They wanted to change the age for one of the courts to have children that are older.
Well, the governor's reform, which was enacted and approved last year, raised the age from 7 to 12 for minimum age, and so it's now 12 to 18 years old that the court has authority unless it's a youthful offender.
Yeah, I just don't, I wouldn't like to see that change to have it, because we just had someone that just beheaded a 14-year-old, and he was 15-year-old. It's in court now. Mm-hmm. And, so and so they have to only give him a certain time because he's within that age. Do you know what I mean? So he can't get a life sentence because he's 15 now. He's 15 now.
Did he? He killed the person.
Yeah, he beheaded
I think that goes to Superior Court.
Yeah.
And I think they would impose. The court could probably give him life
and they're going to question the sentence, but he could get out in how many years because he's considered juvenile. Yeah, I don't know, but it's I think of the the children that are, you know, like you said, just in limbo and they're waiting, and that's so sad. So what changes would you like to make in the system, the way it works?
As I stated, I think getting the cases tried as close to the time standards as possible, and maybe having an early call for trial cases and get those cases. Once the trial starts, it will resolve very quickly, whether through an agreement or otherwise, or the close of evidence. And I think once we identify and I'm able to assist the other judges in that court in getting those done, we'll start knocking these backlog off quickly.
Yeah. What was the most serious case that you've had, would you say?
Certainly, I had a care and protection case a few years back that there was a death of a child, and child had a sibling, and the parents brought the child to the hospital, and child suffered from cardiac arrest and died. And right away, the department got involved and removed the 5-year-old from their home. Both parents ended up getting charged. I represented the mom in that case, and it was extremely difficult where she was balancing. She was being held on a very high cash bail and indicted in Superior Court on wanton reckless, I think she was charged with a substantial injury to a child. And that case went on for about 2 years, and eventually my client, the mother, resolved her matters in the Superior Court through a plea of being present where a substantial injury occurred. The child had been with her grandparents or her parents throughout the entire process, and she realized and recognized the bond and attachment that occurred between her daughter and her parents. And although she'd been released from custody, she voluntarily signed an open adoption to ensure that her child would remain with her parents until she was emancipated.
I see. Again, tell me when that interview was before Sharon Casey was...
Attorney Ross,
Yeah.
I believe that was March 27th, 2019.
Okay. So, what changes do you think have to be done with all your experience? 33 years?
Well, it's you know, I'm asking to be confirmed as a judge because I want to listen and help the people that are before me. The presiding judge and the administrative judge will make those policy changes that meet the court's needs.
Well, you certainly had the best person.
I absolutely
to
did.
And I'm very proud. That was my proudest vote, really. I mean, just you talking about it from your heart, and that's what you need. You need that.
Judge Erskine's been absolutely 100% a home run. She's been wonderful. She's very compassionate. She takes every case seriously. It's been a real pleasure appearing in front of her.
That's great. That's great.
Thank you.
I'm trying to think now. How many years ago that was? Wow, jeepers. That was one of my best votes, that's for sure. Thank you for all your service. So, you people are special to specialize in this type of thing because it's getting worse. Our society is getting worse, and every day you read about a child that, is being killed or abused or whatever,
Understood.
So I really credit you people for doing it because it's difficult. But I thank you for it, and I wish you all good luck. And
Thank you, Counsel.
I don't have a poker face, and I'm very happy.
Thank you, Counsel.
You're there. Okay.
Council Juvenile.
Thank you. Hi.
Good afternoon.
Have you ever been in the House of Correction?
Yes.
Or state prison?
Yes.
How many times have you been in those places?
Worcester House of Correction, that's the only county I've been in, probably 40, 50. State prison, 2 or 3. Not too much experience going into a state prison.
I take it always as a lawyer.
I hope so.
Yes, sir.
I hope so. Oh my gosh.
That one took a second to sink in. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Jeff.
I had to check my notes.
Oh, my God.
So, you ever been to, when you were a kid, you ever go to a zoo?
I'm sure I have. I know, we had a small zoo in Worcester, Green Hill Park. Remember Green Hill Park? They had a zoo. I'm not sure that my parents ever took us to like a Bronx type of zoo or anything like that.
And the zoo that was in Worcester, they have, what kind of animals they have in the zoo?
Sheep, pigs, chickens, nothing fancy.
No, not tigers or...
No.
So, years ago, they used to have zoos. They had one in Springfield, big zoo, and they had lions and tigers, and they were in cages. They walked back and forth in the cage. You don't see animals in cages anymore in zoos. You notice that?
They have more open areas to roam.
No more cages. We save those for humans. Those are the only people we put in cages in this country.
And from my little world, the first idea is rehabilitation. And, Worcester, the JDAI, the Juvenile Detention Alternative Program that we have, making sure, and, part of my work with CPCS part-time and working with the courts, we meet quarterly and we talk about case flow management stuff and we talk about those issues in the JDA judges, just making sure that the kids are in the best place that they are to be in. As an advocate, I've certainly had a number of kids over the years committed to the Department of Youth Services. We attend staffings with them and the RRTs after the commits, and we listen and we make sure that the right program is identified for those kids and not a holding cell. And I hope we're moving far and fast from that.
Do you believe the data that younger people, especially males, don't mature brain-wise until they're in their mid-20s?
I'm probably a prime example of it. I think that from my own experience, I'm not aware of any scientific data. It's probably true. I'm not aware of any data on the subject, though.
Yeah, there is a lot of data on that males, especially males, mature later than females.
I probably would agree with that.
And what they lack is, we all have as a child in our teenage years, two things, the gas pedal and the brake. But the brake doesn't develop in males until mid-20s.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result, when we're young, when we're in those young ages, and you probably have experienced yourself that, you do things that are reckless, impulsive, because your brain isn't set up to say, you got to slow down on that. A kid goes out on thin ice out in the pond, and the ice breaks and he falls through it. Well, when he's probably 25 to 30, there's a break saying, maybe that's not a good idea, you might fall through. And it's why juveniles were always, in my view, from what I've read, treated differently than grown-ups. And for years, way back when, in the 20s and turn of the century, juveniles were treated differently. We try to always separate them and rehab them out of the general population of prisons. We haven't always been successful.
No.
But today, it seems to me, kids aren't any more impulsive or any more crime attracted than they were when you were younger or adolescent.
Let me just say, I was the kid who went out on the ice, and I fell through the ice. And every time I go to my parents' house with my wife, we drive by the pond, and I kiddingly say to her, "That's the pond I fell through the ice on." The Worcester Court is first and foremost about rehabilitation, and giving these kids an opportunity and the tools that they need to be better. Unfortunately, I've seen as I work there, and I will occasionally go to the district court, and I will look in the dock or I will look in the audience, and I will see a very familiar face. And you try to make an impact on as many as you can, and you steer them in the right direction. But sometimes with kids, you need to peel that onion a little bit, and you see, the family life they have, what they characterize as a family, and where they're coming from, and you can almost predict which kids are going to see them upstairs. And it's unfortunate, but you do everything, and you're as diligent as you can. And the probation staff in Worcester is great in trying to identify and implement services and carrying out the orders of the judges. But at the end of the day, the child or the adolescent needs to feed in and buy in on it and be a part of it. And sometimes it works.
Well, yeah, the probation and the juvenile, as far as my experience has been, are very dedicated officers. In fact, most of the staff, just about all the staff in juvenile courts, are very dedicated. I think you have to be in that arena.
Agreed.
I can't say that about the rest of the court system in probation, because I think outside of juvenile court, it's dysfunctional. Very little supervision going on other than peeing into a cup once a month and asking the judge to put people in jail in cages. So I do see the difference, but I'm sure you have argued to a judge or a clerk in the juvenile system that your client has had something previous on his record, but we're asking for a second chance.
I've had some, Counselor, juvenile cases where these kids have had so many bites of the apple that the core's gone. Each case is looked at individually. The judges that we have are very compassionate and will give the benefit of the doubt to the child almost always, unless it's something totally egregious.
Well, if it's true that this data shows that the brains don't form to a certain age, what is the problem when you ask for a second chance or a third chance? Some of us need a 10th chance. You sound like you might have been one of those youngsters. So until that brain is formed, of course we're going to continue to make mistakes. But sometimes when I ask for a second or third chance or fourth chance before certain judges or clerks, it would be like, well, why should we do that? Why should we give them another chance? Yeah, a chance, I know. But some juveniles need more chances.
They sure do.
Either that or we should set a rule that you only get one chance, and then after that we throw you away.
Well, that's.
Throw our hands up and
I hope that day never comes. Kids.
It doesn't come for you if you're confirmed and you're sitting on a bench, and somebody like me is making an argument with somebody who has been before the juvenile court a bunch of times, and I'm making my lawyers begging an argument that he may need another chance. We all do.
I agree with you, Counselor.
Do you think we hear these cases where juveniles killed another juvenile and they get all kinds of publicity in the court? Do you think they should be handled by the Superior Court?
For murder?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the youthful offender cases that we see, the judges sit as a Superior Court judge, and I think certainly the judges are capable of handling those cases. I'm not sure, Counselor, I'm not sure whether the juvenile certainly could. I think the judges are certainly capable of doing that, and as I said, in some limited circumstances, they do sit as Superior Court judges.
Well, they did it from the time we first had a juvenile court until about, I think it was sometime in the 80s. The law was changed up until then. We did murder cases in the juvenile court. Probably did about 4 or 5 of them.
Wow.
Juvenile court. and judges would have juries, and you'd have a murder trial. If a juvenile was found guilty of murder in the first degree, he did 15 years. Second degree murder at the end of 12. And by the time the person was released in 15 years, instead of being 15, he was 30.
Mm-hmm.
And probably grew up in that system. But that seems to have gone by the boards now. It's no more of that. We've got to have people spend 40, 50 years locked up in a cage, and that's what the public calls for. Politicians that get up on their stump speeches get votes by being tough on crime. We're the only country, the only major country on earth that holds people for life in prison. Just about every other country is 25 years. I don't think we have any different people that are in any other country that we have here in the United States.
I don't think so.
In fact, our crime rates are higher than just about every other country. So, I guess what my hope is that you will be out there, you've done enough work in juvenile court, that you will be a compassionate juvenile judge. The latest thing I had in juvenile court was down in the Fall River, where a kid was calling in, I forget the name they used. He'd call into the school system and say that there's a bomb in the building. And he was using some sort of a phone system where it was hard to track that. They call it something punking or something like that. So the DA wanted restitution in the amount of $22,000 because the fire department had to go to the school and the police department had to go to the school. And of course, my kid was 15 and didn't have 2 cents to rub together. His parents hired me. So the DA wanted the parents to pay for it. And I said, well, they're not under any order for any court to pay me. So the judge ended up waiving the fees in the end. How do you feel about waiving fees for kids who can't pay?
I have no issues with that. I mean, if a child doesn't have the ability to pay, so now for when counsel's appointed, there's a fee, and we give them the option, or the court gives the option to do some community service, and at the end of the day, they remit. I have no issue with ordering, or not ordering fees to be paid.
Have you ever heard of the Henry case?
It is not familiar to me.
It's a Supreme Judicial Court case that's a year and a half or so ago that said if a defendant does not have the ability to make restitution, that the court can't order restitution. Can't order.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't be found in violation of probation if you cannot pay. Fine.
I've always, with restitution cases, and it may go back a few years, I think it was Commonwealth versus Knorr. I think it was a case that talks to the ability of one, having the disposition of a criminal case resolved, if there's a restitution issue, setting up a hearing, and part parcel to the hearing is having the testimony either of the defendant or parents of that child's ability to pay restitution.
The parents are.
Right, exactly, that's right. And then, and as you said, most 15-year-olds don't have 2 cents to rub together.
Have you heard about the district attorney in Suffolk County who got elected a while back, and she has a program in not charging people on certain crimes?
I'm not familiar with that, no.
She took some flack from different news organizations on that. But most of them were minor matters. Like a drug addict was arrested for buying drugs. So instead of having the person arraigned and having that in a record, she would give the person an option. I'll continue your arraignment as long as you agree to go into treatment. If the person does it successfully, then they're never arraigned, and it's not in their record. somebody didn't pay some sort of a bill, like an excise tax bill, your license was suspended. Instead of arraigning the person, she'll give you 30 days to pay the fine.
Those are good ideas.
You know, and I don't know, but juvenile records are supposed to be secure, aren't they, from certain, I find them seeping out now more than ever.
And I know in my own experience, if I'm in the district court and someone's record is produced, more often than times than not, the criminal juvenile is attached. And I know under the new reform, you can certainly ask for expungement of misdemeanor after 3 years, felony after 7 years. You can seek an expungement of that. But I do agree with you, they seem to be seeping out.
Yeah, which is a shame because they have an effect on
Sure does.
people. You know, there was a time when you would go into the service. If you were going to go into service, the DA would dismiss or the judge would dismiss the case. You know, and that went by the board quite a few years ago.
I've had an occasion some years ago, a case had gone to disposition and filed a revise and revoke, and the young man wanted to go into the service, and we got it back in front of the judge, who was Judge Leary, and he did revise the sentence and dismiss the case.
You know, a lot of the services won't take you anymore if you got a case pending or
Right.
if you have a conviction.
I think Grafton Job Corps, the Job Corps that we have won't take a child who's interested if there's an open pending matter.
Yeah. The last one I had was in Brighton Court about the early 90s where I had 2 Marines recruiters ready to take my guy to Paris Island. He was a kid. He was drinking and getting into fights, and that was about the size of it. And judge wouldn't
No, that's too bad.
dismiss it, let him go to Paris Island. They said, he's been on probation, it doesn't work. Paris Island, this kid is not going to be able to leave. When he gets through, he'll be a different person.
Yes, you will.
But those days are gone.
Yeah.
I do think you got a good resume for the juvenile court.
Thank you, Counsel.
I think you have to be all in on juvenile to make a good juvenile.
I agree. I've had some good teachers over the years.
Yeah, I don't go to the juvenile a lot. I do when I get hired now and then, but it's a court with many heads. I mean, you got all these different things you've got to accomplish with different people in the court system, probation, teachers, social workers, parents. It's a multi-headed
Sure is.
thing, and it's, I think it's much more difficult representing people in the juvenile in the district or even the superior, where you just give them DA.
Fair enough.
So I admire you for.
Thank you, Counsel. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Where you're going to feel right at home.
Absolutely. Thank you, Counsel, for your kind words.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, well, it's clearly a sign of the nominee's intelligence that he applied to juvenile court and not probate and family court. That should not be lost on us. Yeah, I'm not going to get into some of the areas that my colleagues touched upon. We don't all agree on some of that stuff, but I think the questions were appropriate. Any comments? I read in your governor's council questionnaire, you were asked, please state any and all political contributions made by your spouse, any your children living at home to any and all candidates for municipal, state, or national office, or to any political committees under Chapter 55 of the general laws during the last 3 years. Your answer, none. Which leads me to my question, what are you doing here? I didn't
Very
get
good.
here.
That's what we like to see.
No, seriously, Steve, I've known you, Attorney Bolivar, for probably about 20 years now, plus or minus. I've been practicing closer to 21 at this point. We've had cases together, so it would be great to see you go on a bench so I don't have to deal with you anymore on some of these big cases. But in all seriousness, you've been a really great colleague to work with.
Thank you,
You've been on
Counsel.
the opposite sides of the V. You've done district court stuff, we've had clerk's hearings, district court cases, criminal, I don't think we've ever had juvenile matters, but you've really done a lot in your career, which I think will serve you very well.
Thank you,
in
Counsel.
the Juvenile court. So I'll miss seeing you in the hallways of Heartbreak Hotel, but I know that you're going on to greener pastures and you will make a difference over there. And I know that Judge Erskine is very, very excited to have you.
Thank you,
As
Counsel.
you know, she
Yeah.
was a big, big advocate of yours. And congratulations to you and your family, to your wife, to your kids. And,
Thank you, Counsel. It means a lot. Your kind words.
Making the motion, your nomination probably will be on May 29th. It appears we're not going to have an assembly next week, but we will have a vote on May 29th with the public school, but I can count. I think you're going to be 8-0. You certainly have the votes you need to be a juvenile court judge.
Thank you, Counsel, for your words.
So, congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, such a pleasure to see you. It's a pleasure to see you too. Thank you so much. Yeah.